2,000 Seasons, a novel by Kwei Armah. Prologue. Spring water flowing to the desert. Where you flow, there is no regeneration. The desert takes. The desert knows no giving. To the giving water of your flowing, it is not in the nature of the desert to return anything, but destruction. Spring water flowing to the desert, your future is extinction. How? People headed after the setting sun. In that direction, even the possibility of regeneration is dead. There the devotees of death take life, consume it, exhaust every living thing. Then they move on, forever seeking newer boundaries. Wherever there are living remnants undestroyed, there lies more work for them. Whatever will direct itself after the setting sun, in ashen death lies in wait for it. Whichever people make the falling fire their aim, a pale extinction awaits them among the destroyers. Woe the headwater needing to give, giving only to flood water flowing desertward. Woe the link from the spring to the stream. Woe the link receiving spring water only to pass it on, then a stream flowing to waste, seeking extinction. You hearers, seers, imaginers, thinkers, rememberers, you prophets called to communicate truths of the living way to a people fascinated unto death. You called to link memory with forelistening, to join the uncountable seasons of our flowing to unknown tomorrows, even more numerous. Communicators doomed to pass on truths of our origins to a people rushing deathward, grown contemptuous in our ignorance of our source, prejudiced against our own survival. How shall your utterance be heard? This is life's race. But how shall we remind the people hypnotized by death? We have been so long following the falling sun, flowing to the desert, moving to our burial. In the living night comes voices from the source. We go to find our audience, open our mouths to pass on what we have heard. But we have fallen among a fantastic tumult. The noise the hypnotized make, multiplied by every echoing cave of our labyrinthine trap, is heavier, 1,000,000 times louder than the sounds we carry. Hoarsened, we whisper our news of the way. In derisive answer, the hurtling crowds shriek their praise songs to death. All around us, the world is drugged white in a deathly happiness, while from under the setting sun, powerful engines of noise and havoc emerge to swell the cacophony. Against their crashing riot, nothing whispered can be heard, nothing said. Indeed, the tumult welcomes who would shout and burst the veins on his own neck. His message murdered before birth, the shouter only helps gives confusion. Giver of life, spring whose water now pours down destruction's road, a rushing cataract. Your future is destruction, your present a giving, given into a void with no return. Your flow knows no regeneration. Say it is the nature of the spring to give. It is the nature of the desert sand to take. Say it is the nature of your given water to flow. It is the nature of the desert to absorb. It is your nature also, spring, to receive. Giving, receiving, giving, continuing, living. It is not the nature of the desert to give. Taking. The desert blasts with destruction whatever it touches, and whatever touches it. Whatever gives of itself to the desert parts from regeneration. It is for the spring to give. It is for the spring water to flow. But if the spring will continue to give and the spring water continue flowing, the desert is no direction. Along the desert road, spring water is the sap of young wood prematurely blazing, meant to carry life quietly, darkly from roots to farthest veins, but abruptly betrayed into devouring light, converted into scalding pus, hissing its own vessel's destruction. Along the desert road, spring water is blood of a murdered woman, when the sun leaves no shadow. No spring changes the desert. The desert remains. The spring runs dry. Not one spring, not 30, not 1,000 springs will change the desert. For that, change floods, the waters of the universe in unison, flowing not to coax the desert, but to overwhelm it, ending its regime of death, that, not in a single perishable spring, is the necessity. Receiving, giving, receiving. All that lives is twin. Who would cast the spell of death, let him separate the two. Whatever cannot give, whatever is ignorant even of receiving. Knowing only taking, that thing is past its own mere death. It is a carrier of death. Woe the giver on the road to such a taker, for then the victim has found victorious death. Woe the race, too generous in the giving of itself, that finds a road not of regeneration, but a highway to its own extinction. Woe the race, woe the spring, woe the headwaters, woe the seers, the hearers, woe the utterers, woe the flowing water. People hustling to our death. What remains? To sing regret, curse ancestors, and through stagnant lives pass down the malediction on those yet to come? Easy that lazy existence, sweetly drugged, the life spent waiting upon death. Easy the falling slide, even for rememberers. We who hear the call not to forget what is in our nature have not betrayed it in this blazing noonday of the killers. Around us, they have placed a plethora of things screaming denial of our nature, things welcoming us against ourselves, things luring us into the whiteness of destruction. We too have drunk oblivion, and overflowing with it, have joined the exhilarated chase after death. We cannot continue so, for a refusal to change direction, for the abandonment of the way. For such perverse persistence, there are no reasons, only hollow, unconvincing lies. And the seers, the hearers, the utterers, what sufficiency is there? In our hearing, only this season's noise, seeing only the confusion around us here, uttering, like cavernous mirrors, a wild echo of the howling cacophony engulfing us. That is not the nature of our seeing, that is not our uttering. Only our drugged wariness, unjustifiable, keeps us bound to the present. How we have come to be mere mirrors to annihilation. For whom do we aspire to reflect our people's death? For whose entertainment shall we sing our agony? In what hopes? That the destroyers, aspiring to extinguish us, will suffer conciliatory remorse at the sight of their own fantastic success? The last imbecile to dream such dreams is dead, killed by the saviors of his dreams. Such idiot hopes come from a territory far beyond rebirth. Those utterly dead, never again to wake, such is their muttering. Leave them in their graves. Whatever waking form they wear, the stench of death pours ceaseless from their mouths. From every opening of their possessed carcasses comes death's excremental pus. Their soul itself is dead, and long since putrefied. Would you have your intercourse with these creatures from the graveyard? Go to them then, and speak your message to the long-rotted ash. This sight, this hearing, this our uttering, these are not for dumb recording of the senseless present, unless the vocation we too have fallen into is merely to be part of the cadaverous stampede, hurrying on the rush to destruction. The linking of those gone, ourselves here, those coming, our continuation, our flowing, not along any meretricious channel, but along our living way, the way. It is that remembrance that calls us. The eyes of seers should range far into purposes. The ears of the hearers should listen far towards the origins. The utterer's voice should make knowledge of the way, of heard sounds and visions seen. The voice of the utterer should make this knowledge inevitable, impossible to lose. A people losing sight of origins are dead. A people deaf to purposes are lost. Under fertile rain, in scorching sunshine, there is no difference. Their bodies are mere corpses, awaiting final burial. What when the tumult and rush are yet too strong for the voice to prevail, uttering heard sounds of origins, transmitting seen visions of purposes? What when all our eyes are raked by destruction's furious whiteness? Easy then on the falling side. Soft the temptation to let despair absorb even the remnant voice. Easy for the unheeded seers, unheard listeners. Easy for interrupted utterers to clasp the immediate destiny, yield, and be pressed to serve victorious barrenness. Easy the call to whiteness. Easy the welcome unto death. Have we not seen the devotees of death? They are beyond the source's beckoning. Purpose has no power to draw them forward from dead to days. Make way for them along the easy road. Those with their guts cracked out of them. Those with minds so minced, all their remembrance would turn into pain. Lead them along the easy road. Do not condemn. Do not pity them. Let them go. Or would you try reminding them of their murdered selves, as well as graft back blighted leaves? Some restful night, after the first 1,000 and second 1,000 seasons, the loss of such devoted to whiteness in their souls would appear justly again. But among the rushing multitude, remembering well the many rushing, just because that is the present road, rushing not out of devotion, but because they are of a nature to take their internal order from present season surroundings. It is a waste of the seer's thought, the hearer's breath, a waste of the utterer's spirit to pour blame on such natures. Were the surrounding order the order of the way, these also again would be people of the way. It is their nature to flow along channels already deepened by recent flow. It is not in their nature to wander, threatening their easy peace with thinking if channels already found run true. Finders they are, not makers. Would you too, in pride miming the white, deathly people, would you also heap contempt upon them? Do it directly then, and for your own satisfaction, undisguised. Only plead no disappointment that the ones you so contemn, they too have not turned out to be makers. Finders they are. Never did they deceive you with any promise to be creators. And if the mind channels of the way are all destroyed, and the only channels left lie along the white road, drawing from remembrance, from knowledge of future purpose, it is for the hearers to listen, for the hearers to glean, what through accident death's messengers have not found to silence. And if all around us has indeed been touched by them, to destroy, who retain the desire to remake themselves and act upon the desire to remake themselves, the remade are pointers to the way of remembrance, the way of knowing purpose. It is this present season, the flow is so powerful in the direction of death. It has been so long, ever since before Anoa spoke her prophecy of 1,000 seasons and another 1,000 seasons and 1,000 seasons wasted wandering amazed along alien roads, another 1,000 seasons spent finding paths to the living way. The reign of the destroyers has been long. It will be longer. But what is our present despair against the sharp abandonment of those first snatched away to waste? What pettiness! This our anxiety against the howling agony of their murdered soul. Remember this, against all their destruction, some yet remained among us, unforgetful of origins, dreaming secret dreams, seeing secret visions, hearing secret voices of our purpose. Further, those yet to appear, to see, to hear, to utter, and to make little, little do we know what changes will come among them. Idle then for us to presume despair on their behalf. Foolish when we have no knowledge of how much closer to the way their birth will come. How much closer than ours, closest hopes. Not all our souls are of a nature to answer the call of death, however sweetened. Easy these seasons to forget this too. Seasons ago, the first 1,000 seasons passed. Before the passing of the second 1,000, even before then, the time will come when those multitudes starting out On the road of death must meet predecessors returning scalded from the white waste, the white taste of death. These first returners, their wounds are so raw, their minds so butchered, with the enormity of fate so recent, so closely grazed, that the very sound of their voices, the very sight they present, is unacceptable, unreal, impossible to the hastening, careless, prancing, advancing multitudes. These first returners, amid the general oblivious happiness, they appear mere capricious nightmares, specific, unfortunate accidents, particular mishaps to be sidestepped on the jubilant white road. Single apparitions easy to ignore, but most pleasantly easy to forget. But farther along the road, more returning apparitions arise. They are intermittent still, but frequenter. Minds still unwounded in a dizzy, happy deathward rush, chancing upon this frequency of warning casualties, begin to wonder if the advancing dance will really be the promised revelry. More apparitions. The thoughtful are giving greater pause. There are many now. Some half concealed in the other wreckage along the happy highway, completely ruined, bled of life's juices. They have staggered, groping for the source, their purpose now the condemned past. Unable to stagger further, they lie unburied by the common road, their corpses multiplying, their feet pointing to their destruction. Returning casualties, many now, and desperate, challenge the progressing revelers for right of way. When the numbers of the hopeful going and the desperate fleeing back are almost even, then the interrupted revelry becomes pure carnage. For those with no understanding of the source, those blessed in their ignorance of doom's whiteness, the blind revelers are anxious to cascade away, to obey the highway's call. Those who have seen the white destination and yet escaped death, stampeding back, crashed into the unbuffered collision against the revelers. Their spirits, contempt from those escaping death, contempt against the revelers for seeking what so recently they themselves sought, clashes with pure incomprehension from the hopeful revelers. How indeed would a living understanding come to those who have fled knowledge of the source? And those running back to the source in their new desperation, have they not more fear of death's horror than love of life? Whiteness indeed they have known. Of our own blackness they have yet to learn. You who yearn to be hearers, you who would see, you the utterers of the future, this is not the season for contempt. Look upon those in whose nature it is to wait upon death to create in them a need to know life. Look upon them, but in this season do not look too steeply. Say then, the multitude is noisier after hearing the shaking, shattering knowledge of the pale road of death. Are your ears also dead? This noise is not the recent uniform cacophony of death victorious, death alone ruling. Now the customary noises of triumphant death have the tone of lies to some of our ears. In such a season, the voice informed with knowledge of the way, that voice whose utterance is inseparable from life, that voice will be heard. For there are ears straining against the loud nonsense of the destroyers, ears that have heard all the sweet and easy sounds of death and found them false. Would you lock away your gift in pallid silence? Know then that in the absence of the utterer's work, the carnage will be long and pure, and not the wisest mind can in the absence of the utterer's work trace in all our flowing blood even one broken ring of meaning. For those returning, salvaging blistered cells from death, and those advancing, still hypnotized by death, in the absence of the utterer's work, what will they be but beasts devouring beasts, zombies fighting zombies, a continuation along the road of death in place of regeneration, the rediscovery of our way, the way. Leave the killer spokesman, the predator spokesman, leave the destroyer spokesman to cast contemptuous despair abroad. That is not our vocation. That will not be our utterance. Selves sought, clashes with pure incomprehension from the hopeful revelers. How indeed would a living understanding come to those who have fled knowledge of the source? And those running back to the source in their new desperation, have they not more fear of death's horror than love of life? Whiteness indeed they have known. Of our own blackness they have yet to learn. You who yearn to be hearers, you who would see, you the utterers of the future, this is not the season for contempt. Look upon those in whose nature it is to wait upon death to create in them a need to know life. Look upon them, but in this season do not look too steeply. Say then, the multitude is noisier after hearing the shaking, shattering knowledge of the pale road of death. Are your ears also dead? This noise is not the recent uniform cacophony of death victorious, death alone ruling. Now the customary noises of triumphant death have the tone of lies to some of our ears. In such a season, the voice informed with knowledge of the way, that voice whose utterance is inseparable from life, that voice will be heard. For there are ears straining against the loud nonsense of the destroyers, ears that have heard all the sweet and easy sounds of death and found them false. Would you lock away your gift in pallid silence? Know then that in the absence of the utterer's work, the carnage will be long and pure, and not the wisest mind can in the absence of the utterer's work trace in all our flowing blood even one broken ring of meaning. For those returning, salvaging blistered cells from death, and those advancing, still hypnotized by death, in the absence of the utterer's work, what will they be but beasts devouring beasts, zombies fighting zombies, a continuation along the road of death in place of regeneration, the rediscovery of our way, the way. Leave the killer spokesman, the predator spokesman, leave the destroyer spokesman to cast contemptuous despair abroad. That is not our vocation. That will not be our utterance. The rediscovery of our way, the way. Leave the killer spokesman, the predator spokesman, leave the destroyer spokesman to cast contemptuous despair abroad. That is not our vocation. That will not be our utterance.